Hi, I'm the fellow passenger. In this video, I'm going to make some electro using hardware synthesizers. The bass line we are starting off with is using the ARP axe, which I'm controlling from Ableton using CV and gate. So thinking about the type of electro that I like and I'm intending to make in this video, it's quite sparse and I want to make like a call and response. So even if I set this to a longer loop, I'm leaving most of it or half of it empty, or perhaps even more in a way. That's just to leave space for a response bass line that I'm going to make later, rather than having lots of things overlapping. I like to keep it sparse, and the same when it comes to the drums. So as you can see here, I got some notes in the first bar and in the third bar, but I'm leaving the second and the fourth bar empty. Well, I'm playing around with adding some notes there, but I'm coming to the conclusion that I should probably not have that in there. I've had the ARP axe for, I don't know, a few months now. I absolutely love the sound. It's very basic, but I was lucky to pick it up for not that much money in the context of how much these things go for now. I'm having some trouble with it in terms of keyboard tracking, so I'm going to take this to a service in October, because if I flick the octave switch, if it was a C one octave down, it's not going to be a C one octave up, and definitely not 2 octaves up. It will have drifted a couple of semitones or so. Okay, I think it's time to add some drums. And as you can see here in the column of instruments, I've made presets for all my hardware synths. So I've got the input channel and everything already set up, and the MIDI channel and everything, so I don't have to do that over and over again. With a lot of stuff that I do, I find it important to be able to work fast, or at least with the things that I don't enjoy that much. So for example, just spending a bit of time setting up those presets saved me so much time. For the drums, I'm using the Behringer RD8. Well, it's definitely the drum machine I use the most. My particular one has got some issues that needs to be sorted, but still, I think it's a good machine. It would look nice among my other vintage synths to have a real TR-808, but finances just doesn't allow that sort of purchase at the moment. So one of the issues with my RD8 is that the open hi-hat sometimes won't trigger unless I'm just wiggling the volume knob a bit, like you see there. Sometimes then it sort of kicks in, and once it's started, it's fine. Another couple of words about the beat that I'm making here. I'm doing a bit of probability, which if I would sit down and complete this track, I would probably not do that. But because I'm just making a bit of a loop in this video, it just adds a bit more variety. Also, the RD8 has 2 settings for velocity. So I've set on each beat of the bar, I've set the velocity to max, and that makes the drums a bit louder. And all the other in-between notes, the velocity isn't max, and therefore they play slightly quieter. So I'm adding the response bass line now, and for that I'm using the Roland SH2. And I'm using complementary notes here. So the other bass line was revolving around a D with occasional one semitone up or down, or a complete octave jump. I'm not that good with music theory, but there's certain intervals that play nicely together. So for example, the D, which the other one is, a corresponding note is A. Those two tend to sound quite nice together, and that particular interval. So if I then play a D sharp, the same interval, the equivalent interval would then be an A sharp, so you can sort of play around with them. So the second bass line here, which is not overlapping with the first bass line, it's sort of sitting in between bar 1 and 2 or between bar 2 and 3, keeping it quite sparse. But they are sort of playing off each other. So the second bass line is based around A. I feel I'm working fairly quickly here, and that is partly thanks to just practicing workflow and having set up presets and stuff like that. But I also have to admit that before this video I had tuned the synths, and some of them just happened to have fairly decent settings already, so I'm working a lot with that. Oh, we heard a reverb there. That's the return channels. So I've got 3 return channels here, and they're all hooked up to hardware equipment. So the reverb you heard there, that was the Zoom 1204, a vintage rack effect. The second one, the channel B, that's Annalise's Quadra-Verb, which is also a classic rack effect. And the third one is a Roland Space Echo RE201 classic tape echo. All right, we've suddenly come to string time. Let's use the Alpha Juno for that. I think that's a really underrated synth, and I use it for pads and strings a lot, and often start off with preset 21 or 22, the Juno strings. And then I got a DT300, which is an external controller, which we will see in a second, where it's easy to tweak the sounds without having to step through the menu. The original Roland one is called PG300, but those cost arguably more than the synth itself. And I'm very happy with the newly produced DT300, which you can just buy off the internet at the moment. It's such an underrated synth. You can still get them easily for under £500. I think they're really versatile and have an interesting sound palette, and they definitely don't sound like software somehow. All right, we're setting up some sparse strings here, and again, using those notes we talked about before. So I'm starting off with the D and then a D sharp, and then I will make some simple 2-note chords, and then again using the corresponding notes, the A and the A sharp, or sometimes the flat, as you will see. Those semitones seem to create such good tension somehow and add a bit of mystery to the tracks. Here I quickly realized that those longer notes, they're slightly too long. They should end short as well, just to create it slightly more sparse and raw and snappy. So this is the DT controller. Let's change the high pass filter because I don't want any low end in that pad, but also turning down the low pass filter a bit so we get just some mid-range tones happening there. I like these sort of pads to sit somewhere in the background, and now I'm probably turning the release up too much. Also adding a very slow LFO there on the controlling the filter, just having it evolve over time a bit. While we're listening to this, I should also mention that if you want to support this channel and sign up to my Patreon, you will be able to grab this project file. It will have all the MIDI in it. It will also have all the rendered stems from these different synths. Keep in mind that I will be using some effects that you may not have, but you still have access to the stems and you can do whatever you like with them if you just want to have a look into modify the MIDI, use your own synths with it, or just if you want to chop up the audio and do something interesting with that. So just want to flag that. Also have some other tiers where I share sample banks on a weekly basis that I've made both using hardware and software and all sorts of things. There's tons of sounds on there. Alright, it's arpeggio time, and for that I'm going to use the Roland JX3P. I'm just painting a melody in here. This sound is pretty awful, but I'm using the notes that we discussed earlier. But it will be important to find a much better sound. And again, thinking about that sparseness of kick and snare not overlapping and having the call and response bass line, I want to find a slot for this little arpeggio motif sitting somewhere where it doesn't clash with everything else, just to give that some space. Just separate things out as much as possible. That just give every piece in the music a bit of chance to breathe. I don't have a programmer for my Roland JX3P. I'm planning to get one. There is the equivalent of the DT300. I think it's called DT200 for the JX3P. Again, the PG200, the original Roland one, costs more than the synth. So I'm also here going to start with a preset and then programming it using the built-in or the onboard programming thing where you have to tap some keys and you change the value using that one slider. It's actually not too bad. It's not too bad, and you learn it fairly quickly. And the sort of cheat code is printed on the synth there on the right. You can just see it coming into view sometimes. So for this, I want a sort of a bell-like sound, but very, very short and clicky like that. But also realizing that as we are spreading out all our notes, not to overlap, I also want to spread out the frequency spectrum. So we have a lot of low things. We got the bass, and then we got the pad sitting a bit higher up. So I would like these ones to sit even higher than that. Quite low volume on those effects, but yeah, it still adds a bit of space. We also need some electro sound, I don't know what you call these sort of sounds, like bleeps, and in this case we're going to use the Behringer Pro 1 for that, just to have the occasional little electro splutter. That sound is actually not too bad as is, and that's just the sound that happened to be in the synth, but I just can't be too lazy and just use whatever is in there. I will need to tweak it a bit. So let's try to make a new splutter sound, maybe a little more electricity sounding. Lots of resonance, a bit of release, but change the LFO to maybe a square one. Turn the cutoff down, but we have a high envelope control. Oh, that's quite nice. It's sort of subtle and low. But it happens too often. I think it only needs to happen once every 8 bars. Let's add a bit of papery modulated thing using the Eurorack. I've got the SY 0.5, which is a replica of one of the voices on the Pearl's Concussion. I could have used the fast phaser or flanger on the snare drum, but I'm doing this instead. I'm just adding this SY 0.5 and just layer it on top of the snare drum. Let's just make sure that we just reduced all the low frequencies where they're actually not needed, so that papery splash or the, what should we call it, the thing from the Pro 1, the little electronic sound, doesn't need any low end. The pad doesn't need any low end. The arpeggio definitely needs no low end. And I've noticed, especially with a lot of my hardware, there's a lot of hidden little frequencies bubbling away there. Even though you don't necessarily hear them, they're there and they're going to muddy up your mix. I have to admit, I don't know why, but I've always found it much easier when I'm using hardware to get things to sit neatly in the mix. They seem to land in the right place much quicker somehow. Alright. I wouldn't call this any mastering, but I'm just gonna do a few things on the master before we call this loop done. I'll just add a little bit of saturation. Maybe a bit of EQ in there. I tend to always get too many frequencies around, or frequency build-up around 200 Hertz. So I usually tend to just dip it a bit there, and to my ears there's a certain type of muddiness that seems to happen there. I'm using the Pro Q4 for this, and it's got the spectral I don't know what you call it, dynamics thing, where you can do a little bit of compression, but rather than it being on the entire band you've selected, it actually picks out where the peaks are within that band. Very clever feature. I think the Pro Q4, if I could only have one external plugin that didn't come with Ableton, if I could only choose one, it would probably be that one. I use it all the time. So putting reverb on the entire mix, I do that quite often, but very, very subtle. If I remember, I'll also do a low cut, so I don't get any low end through the reverb. And then immediately after the reverb, I put a compressor, and in this case, I'm just going to do very quick and dirty and just add an OTT, even though I just turned down the dry wet quite a lot. Because to my ears, if you have a reverb before a compressor, just very subtle, it just creates a little bit of glue that seems to seal the sound together a bit, but don't see this as a mastering tutorial. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little session, and if you want to check out my Patreon and my other videos. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.